Page 100, section entitled A Personal Inventory. The following questions address the general areas we want to look at in a personal inventory. There may be times when our sponsor wants us to do an inventory in a specific area of our lives, such as romantic relationships or our patterns at work, or our sponsor may have specific questions to add to this. We should always consult our sponsor on any step work we're doing. Questions. Have I reaffirmed my faith in a loving, caring God today? Have I sought out the guidance of my higher power today? How? What have I done to be of service to God and the people around me? Has God given me anything to be grateful for today? Do I believe that my higher power can show me how to live and better align myself with the will of that power? Do I see any old patterns in my life today? If so, which ones? Have I been resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Have I set myself up for disappointment? Have I been kind and loving toward all? Have I been worrying about yesterday or tomorrow? Did I allow myself to become obsessed about anything? Have I allowed myself to become too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Am I taking myself too seriously in any area of my life? Do I suffer from any physical, mental, or spiritual problems? Have I kept something to myself that I should have discussed with my sponsor? Did I have any extreme feelings today? What were they and why did I have them? What are the problem areas in my life today? Which defects played a part in my life today? How? Was there fear in my life today? What did I do today that I wish I hadn't done? What didn't I do today that I wish I had done? Am I willing to change? Has there been a conflict in any of my relationships today? What? Am I maintaining personal integrity in my relations with others? Have I harmed myself or others either directly or indirectly today? How? Do I owe any apologies or amends? Where was I wrong? If I could do it over again, what would I do differently? How might I do better next time? Page 101. Did I stay clean today? Was I good to myself today? What were the feelings I had today? How did I use them to choose principle-centered action? What did I do to be of service to others today? What have I done today about which I feel positive? What has given me satisfaction today? What did I do today that I want to be sure I repeat? Did I go to a meeting or talk to another recovering addict today? What do I have to be grateful for today? Next section entitled Spiritual Principles. In the 10th step, we will focus on self-discipline, honesty, and integrity. Self-discipline is essential to our recovery. When we were using, we were self-seeking and self-absorbed. We always took the easy way out, giving in to our impulses, ignoring any opportunity for personal growth. If there was anything in our lives that required a regular commitment, chances are that we only followed through if it wasn't too hard, if it didn't get in the way of our self-indulgence, or if we happened to feel like it. The self-discipline of recovery calls on us to do certain things regardless of how we feel. We need to go to meetings regularly even if we're tired, busy at work, having fun, or filled with despair. We need to go regularly even when, especially when, we're feeling hostile toward the demands that recovery makes on us. We go to meetings, call our sponsor, and work with others because we've decided we want recovery in NA. And those things are the actions that will help us assure our continued recovery. Sometimes we're enthusiastic about these activities. Sometimes it takes every bit of willingness we possess to continue with them. Sometimes they become so woven into our daily existence we're hardly aware that we're doing them. Questions. Why is the principle of self-discipline necessary in this step? How can practicing the principle of self-discipline in this step affect my entire recovery? The principle of honesty originates in step 1 and is brought to fruition in step 10. We are usually nothing less than amazed at the range and depth of our honesty by this point in our recovery. Where before we may have had honest hindsight, able to see our true motives long after a situation was over, we are now able to be honest with ourselves, about ourselves, while the situation is still occurring. Question. How does being aware of my wrongs, self-honesty, help me change my behavior? Page 102. The principle of integrity can be quite complex, but it is integrity more than anything else that commands our ability to practice other principles. In fact, integrity is knowing which principles we need to practice in a given situation and in what measure. For instance, we're standing outside a meeting one night and happen to be part of a group that begins gossiping about someone else in the program. Let's say they're discussing the affair our best friend's spouse is having, and we know it to be true because we heard it from our best friend the previous night. Knowing what to do in this situation will probably take every ounce of integrity we possess. So, which spiritual principles do we need in this situation? Honesty, tolerance, respect, restraint. It's probably our first impulse to rush in, condemning the gossip because we know how much it would hurt our friend to have such private matters discussed publicly. But by doing so, we may confirm the gossip's truth and so hurt our friend more, or we may end up self-righteously humiliating the people involved in the gossip. Most of the time, it isn't necessary to prove we have integrity by confronting a situation we don't approve of. There are a couple of things we could do in this situation. We could either change the subject, or we could excuse ourselves and walk away. Either of these choices would send a subtle message about our feelings and at the same time allow us to be true to our own principles and spare our friend as much as possible. Question: what situations in my recovery have called on me to practice the principle of integrity? How have I responded? Which times have I felt good about my response and which times have I not? Next section, entitled Moving On. One of the most wonderful things about the 10th step is that the more we work it, the less we'll need the second half of it. In other words, we won't find ourselves in the wrong as often. When we come to recovery, most of us have never been able to have any kind of long-term relationship, certainly not any in which we resolved our conflicts in a healthy and mutually respectful way. Some of us had raging fights with people, and once they were over, never spoke of the underlying problems that caused the fights. Some of us went to another extreme, never disagreeing at all with the people who were supposed to be our closest friends and relatives. It seemed easier to keep our distance than to risk creating a conflict that we may then have to deal with. We may then have had to deal with. Finally, some of us just walked away from any relationship in which conflict arose. It didn't matter how much we're hurting the other person. It seemed easier than working through a problem and building a stronger relationship. The 10th step makes it possible for us to have long-term relationships, and we need to have long-term relationships, especially in NA. After all, we depend on each other for our very lives. Many of us feel deeply connected to the people who came to NA when we did and have stayed around. We've done service work with one another, shared apartments with one another, married one another, and sometimes divorced one another. Page 103. We've celebrated milestones in each other's lives, births, graduations, buying homes, promotions, and recovery anniversaries. We've mourned losses together, and we've comforted one another through the painful times in life. We've touched each other's lives and formed a shared history. We are a community. Along with learning to admit when we're wrong comes a freedom that is unlike any we've ever experienced before. It becomes so much more natural for us to admit when we're wrong that we wonder why we ever found it so terrifying. Perhaps because we felt so less than in so many ways. An admission of a mistake felt like we were revealing our deepest secret, our inferiority. But when we found out through working the steps that we weren't inferior at all, that we had just as much value as anyone else, it no longer seemed so crushing to admit we were wrong. We began to feel whole. Question: how does the 10th step help me live in the present? What am I doing differently as a result of working step 10? Working the 10th step makes it possible for us to achieve more balance and harmony in our lives. We find that we're happy and serene much more often than not. Feeling out of sorts becomes so rare that, when it does happen, it's a signal that something is wrong. We can readily identify the cause of our discomfort by taking a personal inventory. The personal freedom that has been building since we began working the steps yields an increase in our choices and options. We have total freedom to create any kind of life we want for ourselves. We begin to look for the meaning and purpose in our lives. We ask ourselves if the lifestyle we have chosen helps the still suffering addict or makes the world a better place in some other way. What we are searching for, we'll find in the 11th step.